The best wedding gift I could give my son and his fiancée was a check for $200,000. Or so I thought. But when my future daughter-in-law stood up in the middle of a five-star restaurant and told me the only thing she actually wanted from me was for me to die and leave the inheritance early, I realized I had been making a mistake. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table. I simply smiled, finished my wine, and went home to cancel every single credit card venue reservation and check I had written. They wanted a wedding to remember. I gave them a day they will never forget. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled their perfect life in less than 24 hours, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button. It helps this old man share his story. And let me know in the comments, what is the most ungrateful thing a family member has ever done to you? I really want to know I am not alone in this. The beginning of the end happened on a Tuesday evening at the Drake Hotel in Chicago. If you know Chicago, you know the Drake. It is the kind of place with crystal chandeliers the size of small cars and carpets so thick you feel like you are walking on sand. I was 5 minutes late. Just 5 minutes. My right knee was throbbing like it had its own heartbeat. That is a souvenir from 1995 when I fell off a second-story scaffolding while building the very foundation that paid for my son's private school education. I limped towards the table near the window, trying to hide the pain, but the cold Chicago wind always settles into my joints this time of year. I saw them before they saw me. Jason, my son, looked sharp in a suit I bought him, his eyes glued to his phone screen. Across from him sat Tiffany. She was adjusting her engagement ring, twisting it under the light to make sure it sparkled enough for whatever social media photo she was about to take. She did not look up when I pulled out the heavy oak chair. She just tapped her fingernail against the face of her watch. "You are late, Rick," she said. She never called me Dad. Never called me Mr. Sterling. Just Rick. Like I was an employee who had clocked in past his shift. I apologized. I told her the traffic on Lakeshore Drive was backed up and my leg was acting up again. I expected a nod. Maybe a small smile. Maybe my son asking if I needed an aspirin. Instead, Jason just sighed finally, looking up from his phone with eyes that looked tired and empty. "Just sit down, Dad," Jason mumbled. "We have to get through the tasting menu quickly. Tiffany has a live stream at 8. I placed my hands on the table. My hands are rough. They are covered in calluses that never go away no matter how much lotion I use. They are hands that have poured concrete framed walls and wired electrical panels for 40 years. Against the crisp white tablecloth of the Drake, they looked like foreign objects. I saw Tiffany glance at my knuckles, then curl her lip just slightly, as if my manual labor was contagious. The waiter arrived, a young man with better manners than my own family, placing a bowl of soup in front of each of us. It was brown creamy and had a smell I couldn't quite place. I took a spoonful. It tasted earthy, almost like soil, but rich. "It is a bit strong, isn't it?" I said, trying to make conversation. "Tastes a bit like those wild mushrooms I used to pick up in Wisconsin, maybe a little too much salt, though." The silence that followed was so loud I could hear the ice melting in my water glass. Tiffany dropped her spoon into her bowl with a clatter. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and looked at me with an expression of pure exhaustion. "Oh my God," she said, her voice loud enough that the couple at the next table turned to look. "You are embarrassing me. This is not wild mushroom soup from some backwoods cabin, Rick. This is porcini and white truffle reduction." "Truffles. Do you even know what that is? Please stop acting so blue-collar. It is a tasting menu, not a buffet at the gas station." I felt the heat rise up my neck. It was not anger yet. It was shame. Deep, burning shame. I looked at Jason. My boy. The boy I used to carry on my shoulders when he was too tired to walk. The boy who sat at our kitchen table while I ate bread and gravy so he could have the only piece of steak we could afford that week. I waited for him to say something. Anything. I waited for him to say, "Tiffany, watch your tone," that is my father." Jason took a sip of his wine and looked out the window. "Babe is right, Dad," Jason said softly, refusing to meet my eyes. "You do not have to critique everything. Just eat it. It is expensive." That was the moment. That was the moment the first crack appeared in the foundation. In construction, you learn to listen to the building. You learn that before a wall collapses, it groans. Before a pipe bursts, it hisses. My family was hissing. I looked down at the soup, a bowl of soup that probably cost more than my first car. I realized I was not a guest at this dinner. I was not the father of the groom. I was the wallet. I was the ATM machine with a pulse. They brought me here not to share the joy of their upcoming wedding, but because the bill was coming at the end, and neither of them intended to reach for it. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I wanted to stand up and walk out. But I am a man of my word. I promised to pay for this wedding. I promised my late wife, Sarah, that I would take care of our boy. So I stayed. I ate the truffle soup that tasted like dirt and disrespect. "So how are the other preparations going?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "The venue is finalized." Tiffany was busy typing on her phone, her thumbs flying across the screen. She didn't stop typing when she answered. "We need more flowers," she said flatly. "The florist quoted us another 10,000 for the orchid archway. The original roses looked cheap, and we need to upgrade the champagne. The brand you picked is fine for a backyard BBQ, but this is an event. My followers expect luxury Rick. $10,000 more for flowers." I did the math in my head. That was 3 months of hard labor back when I started my company. That was freezing mornings and blistering afternoons. "I don't know, Tiffany," I said slowly. "The budget is already pretty high. 200,000 is a lot of money. Maybe we stick to the roses." She finally put the phone down. She stared at me with eyes that were as cold as the Chicago winter. "It is a once-in-a-lifetime event," she hissed. "Do you want your son to look like a pauper? Do you want people to think his family has no class? If you are going to be stingy, just say it. But do not ruin my vision, because you are too cheap to understand elegance." I looked at Jason again. He was shrinking in his seat, making himself small. He knew she was wrong. He knew the value of $1, or at least he used to. I taught him how to balance a checkbook when he was 12. I taught him that interest is the devil, and savings are your best friend. But now sitting in this velvet chair, he looked like a stranger. "It is just flowers," Dad Jason muttered. "We can make it work. Just sign the check. It will make her happy. Make her happy." That was the mantra. Keep the beast fed. The waiter returned to clear the plates. Tiffany waved her hand at him, dismissing him without a thank you, then turned her laser focus back to me. "Look," she said, leaning forward. "Eat fast. Hurry up with the main course. We have a meeting with the lighting designer in 45 minutes, and we cannot be late. You do not need to come to that. You would just complain about the electricity bill anyway. You do not understand art. Just finish up, pay the check, and go home to your recliner. We have real work to do." I sat there stunned. The disrespect was so casual, so practiced. It wasn't an outburst. It was their normal. They had become so comfortable with my generosity that they treated it like an entitlement. I was not a person to them anymore. I was a resource to be mined until it was empty. I looked down at my hands again. The hands that built skyscrapers. The hands that held my wife when she took her last breath. These hands were trembling just a little. Not from age, from rage. "Okay," I said quietly. I did not argue. I did not fight. I ate the rest of the meal in silence. But as I chewed that overpriced veal, I made a decision. I watched them ignore me for the rest of the night, talking only to each other about guest lists and photo angles. They thought I was just a quiet, submissive old man. They thought they had won. But they forgot one thing. I was a contractor. I know how to build things up, but I also know exactly how to tear them down. And if the foundation is rotten, you don't patch it. You demolish it. As I signed the check for $600 for a lunch I barely tasted, I looked at Jason one last time. He was smiling at his phone, probably reading a text from a friend. He didn't say thank you. Neither of them did. "See you later," Tiffany said, as she stood up, grabbing her designer bag. "Don't forget to transfer the flower money by tomorrow morning." I watched them walk out of the restaurant arm in arm, looking like the perfect golden couple. They had no idea that the man they just left behind at the table was about to become their worst nightmare. They thought the wedding was in 3 weeks. But the real show was about to start much sooner than that. And unlike this dinner, they were not going to enjoy the taste of what I was about to serve them. It took exactly 48 hours for them to come back for more. I was sitting in my living room, the one with the leather armchair that has shaped itself to my back over the last 20 years, reading the morning paper. The house was quiet. It is always quiet now. The silence used to bother me after my wife passed, but lately I have come to appreciate it. It is honest. It does not ask for anything. When I heard the key turn in the lock, I did not get up. I knew who it was. Only 2 people have a key to this house, and one of them was me. The door opened and Jason walked in. He did not call out hello. He did not ask if I had eaten breakfast or how my leg was feeling after the rain last night. He just walked straight into the living room, pacing back and forth on the Persian rug, like a man waiting for a jury verdict. He looked terrible, or at least he was trying to look terrible. His tie was loosened. His hair was a little messy, and he had that tight, pinched look around his eyes that he always gets when he is about to lie to me. I folded my newspaper slowly, deliberately, and placed it on the side table. I wanted him to speak first. In negotiation, the first person to speak loses leverage. I learned that bidding on million-dollar high-rises, and apparently I was using it on my own son. "Hey, Dad," he finally said, his voice cracking just a little. "I am sorry to barge in like this. I have not been sleeping." I gestured to the sofa. He sat down on the edge of the cushion, his knees bouncing nervously. He looked around the room, avoiding my eyes. He looked at the fireplace, the old clock on the wall, the dust motes dancing in the sunlight. Anywhere but at me. "What is it, Jason?" I asked. My voice was calm. Too calm. He took a deep breath like a diver preparing to jump into freezing water. "It is about the wedding," he started, wringing his hands together. "We have a problem. A big problem. But also an opportunity. A huge opportunity." I waited. I let the silence stretch out until it became uncomfortable. "Tiffany and I were up all night," he continued, talking faster now. "We got a call from her publicist. Apparently Vogue Weddings is interested in covering our ceremony. Do you know what that means, Dad? It means national exposure. It means my name and your name in the biggest fashion magazine in the world." I looked at him blankly. I built shopping malls and hospitals. I poured the foundations for half the skyline of this city. My name is stamped on brass plaques in lobbies of buildings that will stand for 100 years. I did not need my name in a magazine next to an advertisement for perfume. "That sounds nice, Jason," I said. "So what is the problem?" "The problem is the standards," he said, finally looking at me. "To make the feature, we need to upgrade the production value. The lighting needs to be cinematic. We need a different photographer, one who has shot for the cover before. And we need to hire a social media team to handle the live feed." He paused, licking his dry lips. "How much?" I asked. I did not beat around the bush. He swallowed hard. 60,000. I didn't blink. $60,000. That was more than the down payment on my first house. That was a college education. That was 3 years of salary for a hard-working man. And he was asking for it to take pictures. 60,000 on top of the 200,000 I already gave you, I asked. keeping my face like stone. It is an investment. Dad, he pleaded, leaning forward. His eyes were wide, desperate. You have to understand. I am up for that promotion at the firm next quarter. If my boss sees this wedding in Vogue, if he sees the class, the style, the connections, it seals the deal. This isn't just a party. It is networking. It is my future. It is the future of your grandchildren. There it was. The magic word, grandchildren. He knew exactly where to stick the knife. He knew that all I wanted in this world was to bounce a baby on my knee again. He was using children who did not even exist yet as collateral for a loan he had no intention of repaying. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the sweat on his forehead. I saw the desperation. But I also saw something else. Greed. It was a hunger that had nothing to do with his career, and everything to do with satisfying the woman who was pulling his strings. Tiffany did not care about his promotion. Tiffany wanted to be a celebrity, and my son was just the production assistant running around trying to fund her movie. I stood up. My knees popped. I walked over to the heavy oak desk in the corner of the room. I opened the drawer and pulled out my checkbook. It was a long rectangular book, the old-fashioned kind. I could feel Jason's eyes on my back. I could feel the tension in the room release like a balloon losing air. He thought he had won. He thought the old man was buying the story. I uncapped my pen. I stared at the blank line where the amount goes. $60,000. I could refuse. I could tear this checkbook up and throw him out. But if I did that, would never know the truth. I would never know how deep the rot went. If I stopped now, he would just blame me for his failures forever. He would say I didn't get the promotion because my dad was cheap. No. I needed to let him dig the hole so deep he couldn't climb out. I wrote the date. I wrote his name. Jason Sterling. I wrote out the amount in letters, my handwriting looping and jagged. 60,000 and 0 hundredths. Then I moved to the signature line. This was the test. In the construction business, you learn to protect yourself. When I signed contracts that I wasn't sure about, or when I suspected a supplier was trying to cheat me, I had a failsafe. My legal signature, the one on file with the bank for 40 years, has a very specific loop on the capital R in Richard. It connects directly to the dot on the I. It is subtle, but the bank's verification software is trained to flag anything that doesn't match it for amounts over $10,000. If the signature is off, the bank is supposed to call me immediately for verbal confirmation. I signed the check, but this time I didn't connect the loop. I left a tiny gap. To the naked eye, it looked perfect. To the bank, it should be a red flag. If Jason took this to the bank and tried to cash it, the teller should stop him. They should call me. And if they didn't call me, that meant only one thing. It meant Jason had already added himself as an authorized signer on my account without telling me. It meant he had bypassed the security protocols. It meant he was already stealing from me, and this check was just a piece of theater. I tore the check out of the book. The ripping sound was loud in the quiet room. I walked back and handed it to him. He took it. His hands were shaking. He looked at the amount, and a smile broke across his face. It wasn't a smile of gratitude. It was the smile of a junkie getting a fix. "Thanks, Dad," he said, breathing out. "You won't regret this, I promise. This is going to change everything for us. I am sure it will," I said. He stood up, clutching the piece of paper like it was a winning lottery ticket. He didn't offer to stay for coffee. He didn't ask about my life. He just needed to get that piece of paper to the bank before I changed my mind. "I have to run," he said, backing toward the door. "Tiffany is waiting for me at the florist. We have to put the deposit down by noon. Love you, Dad." The door clicked shut behind him. I walked to the window and watched him get into his car. He drove a luxury sedan that I knew he couldn't afford on his salary. He peeled out of the driveway, driving too fast. I went back to the desk and sat down. I put the cap back on my pen. Now I waited. I looked at the phone on my desk. If it rang, my son was just a desperate fool who needed money. If it stayed silent, my son was a thief. I sat there for an hour, then 2. The sun moved across the floor. The phone did not ring. My heart sank into my stomach. The bank hadn't called. The check had cleared. He had access. He had full access. I opened my laptop and logged into my banking portal. I watched the screen refresh. There it was. Pending transaction, check number 402, minus $60,000. Processed immediately. I closed the laptop. The room felt colder than before. My son hadn't just come here to beg. He had come here to mock me. He knew he could take the money whenever he wanted. He just wanted me to hand it to him so he could feel like he earned it. I sat in the silence, feeling the betrayal settle into my bones like the damp cold of winter. They wanted a Vogue wedding fine. I would give them a show. But the ending wasn't going to be the one they wrote. I reached for the phone, but not to call Jason. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. "Leonard," I said when the voice answered. "It's Rick. I need you to clear your schedule. We have work to do." The silence in my house that afternoon was heavier than any concrete slab I have ever lifted. I sat by the phone for 3 hours, staring at it, willing it to ring. I wanted the bank teller to call me. I wanted her to say, "Mr. Sterling, we have a check here with a signature that does not match your records." I wanted to be angry at my son for being sloppy. But the phone never rang. When I refreshed my online banking screen one last time, the balance had dropped. The $60,000 was gone. It had cleared without a single flag. That meant only one thing. It meant that at some point, probably years ago when I was recovering from my hip surgery and needed help paying bills, Jason had added himself as a joint owner on the account. Or worse, he had filed a power of attorney that I never signed. He did not need my signature on that check. The little test I had set up with the missing loop on the R was meaningless, because to the bank, he was already me. He had not just asked for the money. He had taken it with permission he stole years ago. I felt a cold sweat break out on my back. It was not the money. It was the violation. My son, my own flesh and blood, had been sitting on a golden ticket for years, waiting for the right moment to cash it in. And Tiffany probably knew. She probably coached him on exactly when to pull the trigger. I could not stay in the house. The walls felt like they were closing in on me. I needed air. I grabbed my keys and walked out to my truck. It is an old Ford F-150, dented and scratched with the smell of sawdust and diesel permanently embedded in the seats. It is the only thing in my life that is exactly what it claims to be. I drove without a destination for a while, just letting the hum of the engine drown out the thoughts in my head. Before I knew it, I was heading toward the old neighborhood on the south side. It is where I grew up. It is where I started my business with nothing but a toolbox and a dream. I pulled into the parking lot of Miller's Hardware. It is one of the few places left that hasn't been turned into a coffee shop or a yoga studio. I walked the aisles, running my hands over the copper piping and the bags of mortar. This was my world, a world where things made sense. If you mix the cement right, it holds. If you don't, it cracks. People are not so simple. "Rick Sterling, is that you?" I turned around to see a familiar face. It was Mike. Mike the Sparky. He was an electrician I had worked with on dozens of jobs back in the 90s. He looked older now, his hair completely white, but he still wore the same faded Carhartt jacket. "Mike," I said, forcing a smile. "Good to see you. Still wiring up the city. I am trying to retire, but the bills keep coming." Mike laughed, shaking my hand. His grip was still strong. "It is good to see you, Rick. You look good. A little tired maybe, but good." We made small talk for a few minutes. We talked about the weather, about the price of copper, about how the new generation of tradesmen doesn't know how to bend a conduit properly. It felt good to talk to someone real. It felt good to pretend just for a moment that my biggest problem was a supply chain shortage. But then Mike tilted his head and looked at me curiously. "Say, Rick, speaking of jobs, I drove past that property you bought for your kid up in Oak Brook the other day. The big colonial on the corner?" My heart skipped a beat. Oak Brook, the house I bought for Jason and Tiffany 3 years ago. The house they said was their dream home. The house where they were supposedly living, happily hosting dinner parties and planning their future. "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What about it?" "Well, I was just surprised to see the level of work going on there," Mike said, scratching his chin. "I mean, I know you like to renovate, but tearing down the entire perimeter wall and ripping out the landscaping seemed a bit extreme. And I saw 3 roll-off dumpsters in the driveway full of drywall." "Are you gutting the whole thing?" I froze. My mind was racing. Dumpsters. Tearing down walls, Jason had told me just last week that they had finally finished painting the nursery. He sent me a picture of it. He said they were settled in. He said they loved the garden. I forced a laugh. It sounded hollow in my own ears. "You know how it is, Mike," I lied. "The kids wanted an open concept. You give them a house and they want to knock down every wall. It never ends." Mike nodded, but he looked at me with a strange expression. "Right," he said. "Well, good luck with it." Although I gotta say it looked like the work had stopped when I went by. No trucks, just the dumpsters and a sign for some asset management company on the lawn. Looked a little abandoned, if I am being honest. But hey, what do I know? I am just an electrician. He clapped me on the shoulder and walked away down the aisle toward the circuit breakers. I stood there next to the display of hammers, feeling like I had just been hit by one. An asset management sign, "Dumpsters abandoned." Jason had told me they were living there. He told me the house was perfect. Every time I asked to visit, there was always an excuse. They were painting. They had the flu. They were out of town. Tiffany was redecorating and didn't want anyone to see it until it was done. I had believed them. I had believed them because I wanted to believe them. I walked out of the hardware store and climbed back into my truck. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. I did not go home. I turned the truck toward the highway, toward Oak Brook. It was a 40-minute drive. 40 minutes to think about every lie my son had told me in the last 3 years. I remembered the day I gave them the keys. It was a beautiful house. 4 bedrooms, a big yard, a safe neighborhood. I had used a huge chunk of my retirement savings to buy it outright so they wouldn't have a mortgage. All I asked was that they pay the property taxes and the utilities. I wanted them to have the start in life that I never had. I remembered Jason hugging me, tears in his eyes. He said, "Dad, we will take care of it. We will make it a home." I merged onto the interstate, pressing down on the gas pedal. The truck roared, matching the anger building in my chest. If Mike was right, if the house was being gutted, where were they living? And why did they need $60,000 for a wedding photographer? If they were destroying the house I gave them. The miles flew by. I exited the highway and drove through the winding streets of Oak Brook. The lawns here were manicured. The houses were mansions. It was a place for doctors and lawyers and people who did not have dirt under their fingernails. I turned the corner onto their street. My stomach tightened. I saw it from a block away. Mike had been polite. He had downplayed it. The house didn't just look like it was under renovation. It looked like a war zone. The beautiful brick wall that surrounded the front garden was gone, replaced by a temporary chain-link fence that was falling over. The lawn, which used to be green and lush, was dead yellow grass, knee-high and full of weeds. And there, sitting in the driveway like massive steel coffins, were 3 overflowed dumpsters. But that wasn't what made me stop the truck in the middle of the street. It was the sign. Stuck into the dead grass right where the mailbox used to be was a white sign with red letters. It did not say asset management like Mike thought. It said foreclosure auction. Notice of seizure. I sat there, the engine idling, staring at the sign. Foreclosure. How could there be a foreclosure? I bought the house cash. There was no mortgage. Unless they took one out. A wave of nausea hit me. They had mortgaged the house. They had taken a loan against the equity I gave them, and they hadn't paid it back. I put the truck in park and stepped out. The air smelled of rot and wet drywall. I walked up the cracked driveway. There were no curtains in the windows. Through the glass I could see the inside. It was empty. Completely empty. No furniture. No nursery. No life. They didn't live here. They hadn't lived here in a long time. I walked around to the back. The swimming pool was black with algae and filled with trash. Beer cans, pizza boxes. It looked like a fraternity house after a party that ended 6 months ago. I took out my phone. I had a picture Jason sent me last week. It showed him and Tiffany smiling in a beautiful sunlit living room with a caption while loving our Sunday morning coffee at home. I looked at the phone. Then I looked at the rotting house in front of me. The picture was a lie. The background was fake. Or it was taken somewhere else. They had taken my gift, the symbol of my life's work, and they had turned it into cash. They had sucked the value out of the bricks and mortar and left the shell to rot. And then they came to me asking for $60,000 for photos. I stood in the weeds looking at the ruin of my generosity. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. The sadness was gone now. It was replaced by something colder, something harder. I was done being the father. I was done being the provider. I took a picture of the foreclosure sign. Then I took a picture of the empty, gutted living room. I walked back to my truck. I had one stop to make before I went home. I needed to see a professional. I needed to see the only man who could help me navigate the demolition I was about to start. I needed my lawyer. And God help Jason and Tiffany because I was about to bring the whole house down on top of them. I walked closer to the chain-link fence that now surrounded the property. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a dull, heavy rhythm that matched the bass of the music coming from the backyard. It was not the sound of construction. It was not the sound of hammers or drills or men shouting about measurements. It was pop music, loud and synthetic, blasting from speakers that were definitely not approved by the Homeowners Association. I moved to the side of the garage where the temporary fence had a gap. I squeezed through, ignoring the snag of the metal on my jacket. I needed to see. I needed to understand what was happening to the legacy I had built for my son. When I rounded the corner to the backyard, I stopped dead in my tracks. The swimming pool, the one I had just seen filled with trash, was now the center of a chaotic scene. But the trash had been pushed out of the frame. In its place was a film set. There were at least 10 people back there. Strangers. People I had never seen before. They were setting up massive light stands, unrolling reflective screens, and shouting orders at each other. The patio furniture, the expensive teak set I had bought them as a housewarming gift, was gone. In its place were cheap, trendy plastic chairs that looked like they belonged in a music video, not a family home. And then I saw her. Tiffany was standing at the edge of the pool. It was 50 degrees in Chicago. The wind coming off the lake was biting, but she was wearing a tiny gold bikini, shivering uncontrollably between shots, while a makeup artist dabbed powder on her face. I looked around for Jason. I expected him to be inside, maybe arguing with the crew, maybe trying to stop this madness. But he was not inside. He was right there. My son, a 32-year-old man with a college degree, a man who managed a team at a logistics firm, was standing knee-deep in the freezing water of the pool. He was holding a large silver reflector disc above his head, trying to bounce light onto Tiffany's face. His trousers were rolled up, but I could see his legs were turning blue. Higher, Tiffany screamed. Her voice cut through the music like a circular saw. "You are casting a shadow on my neck. Do you want me to look fat? Lift it up, you idiot." Jason adjusted his grip. His arms were shaking. Not just from the cold, but from exhaustion. "I am trying, Tiff," he said, his voice weak. "The wind keeps catching it." "Well, hold it tighter," she snapped, striking a pose that looked ridiculous and unnatural. "We are paying the videographer by the hour. Stop wasting my money and do your job." My stomach churned. Do your job. That is what she called it. Being her servant was his job. I watched as a man with a camera, a guy with a man bun and ripped jeans walked up to Jason. "Hey man," the cameraman said, snapping his fingers. "Can you move to the left? You are ruining the aesthetic, and try not to look so miserable. It is killing the vibe." I waited for Jason to throw the reflector into the water. I waited for him to punch the guy. I waited for him to tell Tiffany to go to hell. But he didn't. "Sorry," Jason mumbled. He waded to the left, the freezing water sloshing around his calves. "Is this better?" I felt a tear run down my cold cheek. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was grief. I was grieving the death of the man I thought I raised. I raised him to be strong. I raised him to be kind, but firm. I raised him to respect himself. And here he was, shivering in a pool of dirty water, letting a woman who didn't love him treat him like a piece of equipment. I stepped back behind the garage wall, unable to watch anymore. I leaned my head against the cold brick. That is when I heard two of the crew members talking near the back door. They were smoking cigarettes, flicking the ash onto the patio I had paved with my own hands. "Crazy, right?" one of them said. "They rent this place out for $300 an hour as a content studio. They don't even live here." "Yeah," the other guy laughed. "The girl Tiffany, she told me they live in the penthouse at the generic luxury tower downtown. Said this place was too suburban for her brand. She just keeps it empty to rent out to other influencers and for her own shoots. It pays for the lease on the apartment." The lease on the apartment. The puzzle pieces slammed together in my mind. They didn't live here. They never lived here. They took the house I bought them, the house meant to be a permanent foundation for their family, and they gutted it. They sold the furniture. They stripped the soul out of it. And now they were pimping it out by the hour to strangers to pay for a rented apartment in the city, because Tiffany thought the suburbs were not cool enough. They were burning equity to pay rent. It was the financial equivalent of suicide. And the $60,000. The money for the wedding photos. It wasn't for photos. It was probably to pay the back rent on the apartment or the interest on the loan they took against this house. They were drowning. They were drowning in debt and lies, and instead of swimming to shore, they were asking me to throw them gold bars to hold on to. I looked back at the pool one last time. Tiffany was laughing now, a fake plastic laugh for the camera. She draped her arm around a bottle of expensive vodka, pretending to have the time of her life. Jason was still standing in the water, his head down, holding the light. He was not a partner. He was not a husband. He was a prop. He was an accessory she used when she needed someone to blame or someone to hold her things. I realized then that if I gave them more money, I wasn't helping my son. I was financing his slavery. I was paying for the chains that kept him bound to this woman. I turned around and walked back to my truck. I walked quietly. I didn't want them to know I was there. Not yet. I sat in the driver's seat, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I looked at the picture I had taken of the foreclosure sign. Notice of seizure. The bank was taking the house. And you know what good. Let them take it. Because it wasn't a home. It was just a studio. It was a lie made of brick and wood. But I wasn't going to let them take everything. I started the engine. I had seen enough. I had seen the empty rooms. I had seen the foreclosure sign, and I had seen my son broken and humiliated. There was only one thing left to do. I had to verify the paper trail. I needed to know exactly how much they stole and where they hid it. And for that, I needed to go into the belly of the beast. I put the truck in gear. I wasn't going home. I was going to the office of the county recorder of deeds. And then I was going to pay a visit to my bank. Not to withdraw money, but to close the gates. As I drove away, I saw Jason climbing out of the pool in the rearview mirror. He stumbled, almost falling. Tiffany didn't even look at him. She was busy checking the photos on the camera screen. "Hold on, son," I whispered to the empty cab of my truck. "The rescue team is coming. But it is going to hurt like hell before it gets better." I drove straight to downtown Chicago. I did not go home to change. I did not stop for coffee. I drove with the kind of focus I used to have when I was navigating a crane through a narrow city block. My destination was the law offices of Vance and Associates. Leonard Vance has been my lawyer for 30 years and my friend for longer than that. We played high school football together. We buried our wives within 2 years of each other. He is the only man in this city who knows where all my skeletons are buried, mostly because he helped me dig the holes. When I walked into his office, the receptionist did not ask for my name. She took one look at my face, picked up her phone, and whispered a few words. A moment later, the heavy mahogany double doors at the end of the hall swung open. Leonard was standing there. He is a small man, sharp as a tack, who wears three-piece suits even on casual Fridays. He did not smile. He waved me in and closed the door firmly behind us. "Sit down," Rick Leonard said, bypassing the usual pleasantries. "I have the preliminary report you asked for on the property title, and you are not going to like it." I sat in the leather chair opposite his massive desk. The office smelled of old paper and expensive cigar smoke. It was a smell that usually comforted me, but today it made me feel nauseous. "Give it to me straight." "Leo," I said, leaning forward. I saw the sign in the yard. "Foreclosure." "How did they lose a paid-off house in 3 years?" Leonard put on his reading glasses and opened a thick file folder. He slid a piece of paper across the desk toward me. It was a copy of a deed of trust. "They didn't just stop paying taxes," Rick Leonard said, his voice dry and professional. 6 months after you signed the deed over to Jason, he took out a home equity line of credit, AHELOC. I looked at the document. My eyes scanned the numbers. How much I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. Leonard tapped the figure with his pen. $400,000, he said. They maxed it out. The appraisal came in high because of the market boom, and they borrowed against almost 80% of the home's value. 400,000. I felt the breath leave my lungs. I had given them a house worth $500,000, and they had stripped it clean. They had turned the walls and the roof and the floors into cash. "Where did it go?" I whispered. "You don't blow 400 grand on groceries and gas." Did he invest it? Did he start a business? Leonard sighed. He reached for another stack of papers. These were bank statements. Pages and pages of them highlighted in yellow and pink neon ink. "I took the liberty of running a forensic trace on the joint account Jason uses to service the loan," Leonard said. "Since your name was still technically attached as a guarantor on the original transfer documents, I could pull the records." "Rick, this is ugly." He flipped the first page over. "Here is the first chunk," Leonard said. $70,000 to a luxury reseller in Miami. 3 Hermes Birkin bags, purchased within a week of the loan funding. "Handbags," I said, my voice rising. "They bought handbags with the equity of their home." "It gets worse," Leonard said, flipping the page. "See these charges? The Emirates Palace. The Burj Al Arab, first-class tickets on Emirates Airlines. I frowned. Jason told me he went to Dubai for a logistics conference. He said the company paid for it. There was no conference, Leonard said flatly. It was a 10-day vacation. They rented a private yacht for 3 of those days. That trip alone cost them $45,000. I stared at the numbers. It was obscene. It was the kind of spending you see in movies, not in the life of a mid-level manager and an unemployed influencer. But then Leonard flipped to the thickest section of the file. The pages were covered in hundreds of small, repetitive transactions. And this, Leonard said, his voice dropping an octave, this is the drain. This is where the rest of it went. I looked at the names on the statement. Lucky Spin Casino, Bet Online, Crypto Wager. Gambling, I said. Online gambling, Leonard corrected. And high-stakes poker apps. It looks like Tiffany has a problem, Rick. A serious one. I am seeing withdrawals of $5,000 at a time, sometimes 3 times a night. And when she loses, she doubles down. Jason has been trying to cover the losses by shuffling money from the HELOC, but the interest rates on the credit line adjusted upward, and they couldn't keep up with the payments. I sat back in the chair feeling physically ill. It wasn't just greed. It was addiction. My son had mortgaged his future to feed his wife's gambling habit and her need to look rich on the internet. And when the money ran out, when the bank came to take the house, what did they do? Did they come to me and confess? Did they ask for help with rehab? No. They asked me for $60,000 for wedding photos. They were going to throw that money into the pit too, I realized. The $60,000 I just gave them. It probably wasn't even for the wedding. It was probably to stop a loan shark or keep the lights on for another month. Leonard closed the file. He took off his glasses and looked at me with his steel-gray eyes. But that is not why I asked you to come in immediately, Rick, Leonard said. The house is gone. The $400,000 is gone. You can't get that back. That is a hard lesson, but it is a sunk cost. He leaned forward, his expression intensifying. I was monitoring your other accounts just as a precaution, Leonard said. And this morning, while I was tracing the HELOC funds, my security software flagged an alert. He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. It showed a log of digital access attempts. Someone is trying to access your primary retirement brokerage account, Leonard said. The big one. The one with your life savings. I stared at the paper. Who, I asked. The IP address matches the one used to log into Jason's online banking, Leonard said. They have the username. They have been trying to guess the password. They have failed 3 times, which locked the account temporarily. That is the only reason it is still safe. I felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. This wasn't just my son being weak. This wasn't just him being manipulated. This was theft. Attempted grand larceny. They had burned through their own house, and now, like locusts, they were coming for my harvest. They wanted to wipe me out. They wanted to take the money I needed to live on, the money intended for my care when I got too old to walk. They are trying to bankrupt me, I said, my voice trembling with rage. They are desperate, Leonard said. And desperate people do dangerous things. If they get into that account, Rick, they could drain it in minutes. They could wire it to an offshore crypto wallet, and you would never see it again. I thought about the dinner at the Drake. I thought about Tiffany's sneer. I thought about Jason's fake apology this morning. It was all a distraction. While they were distracting me with wedding drama, they were trying to pick the lock on my vault. What do we do, Leo? I asked. I stood up. The exhaustion was gone. I felt the adrenaline of a man who wakes up to find an intruder in his bedroom. Leonard smiled a thin, sharp smile that did not reach his eyes. We go on the offensive, he said. First, we freeze everything. I mean everything. We put a lock on your credit so tight, not even a fly could get a loan in your name. We change every password to a 20-character alphanumeric code that I will keep in my safe. He opened a drawer and pulled out a fresh legal pad, and then Leonard said, uncapping his expensive fountain pen, "We prepare the trap. They want a wedding. We let them think they are getting a wedding. We let them think the money is still flowing. Because if they know you are onto them, they might run or they might try something even more desperate. We need to catch them in the act, Rick. We need to let them walk right off the cliff they built for themselves." I looked at my friend. I nodded. "Do it," I said. "Protect the retirement fund. But leave the checking account open for now. I want them to see the money. I want them to reach for it." Leonard began writing furiously. "One more thing, Rick," he said without looking up. "You need to verify that IP address yourself, just to be absolutely sure. You need to catch them with their hand in the cookie jar." "I know how to do that," I said. I remembered the iPad, the one I left at their apartment, the one with the listening software. "I am going to get you the evidence, Leo," I said, walking toward the door. "You just get the paperwork ready. I want to make sure that when this house of cards falls, it falls on them, not me." I walked out of the office. The sun was setting over Chicago, casting long shadows across the street. The city looked beautiful, but beneath the surface it was made of concrete and steel. Hard things. Unforgiving things. I buttoned my coat. I had been a soft father for too long. It was time to become hard again. It was time to protect what was mine. The next evening I put on the best performance of my life. I have never been an actor. I am a man who deals in concrete and steel materials that do not know how to lie. But to catch a liar, you have to become one at least for a few hours. I invited them over for dinner. I told them I was making my famous meatloaf. It was a test. I knew Tiffany hated my cooking. She called it peasant food. If they showed up, it meant they were still hungry for my money, because they certainly weren't hungry for my beef and potatoes. I spent the afternoon setting the stage. I didn't clean up the kitchen. I left a few cabinet doors open. I put my keys in the refrigerator. I wanted the house to look like the mind of a man who was losing his grip. When the doorbell rang, I shuffled to answer it. I didn't limp because of my knee this time. I limped because I wanted to look frail. Jason and Tiffany stood on the porch. Tiffany was wearing a coat that cost more than my first truck, and she looked at my modest front door with the same disgust she had shown at the restaurant. "Hi, Dad," Jason said, stepping inside. He smelled of expensive cologne likely bought with the money from the home equity loan. I blinked at him, holding the door open a beat too long. "Jerry," I said. "Is that you?" Jason frowned. He exchanged a quick look with Tiffany. "It is Jason, Dad." "Your son, right, Jason," I said, tapping my forehead with a shaky hand. "Sorry, my memory. It is like a sieve these days." Come in. I think I put the roast in the oven. Or maybe it was the microwave." I led them into the kitchen. I watched them from the corner of my eye. Tiffany smirked. It was a cruel, satisfied little smile. She nudged Jason and whispered something I couldn't hear, but I could guess what it was. She was thinking that the doctor's note for the competency hearing would be easy to get. She was thinking the old man was finally cracking. Dinner was excruciating. Tiffany pushed the meatloaf around her plate like it was toxic waste. Jason ate quickly, nervously checking his phone every 2 minutes. "So, Dad," Jason said between bites, "about the wedding funds. Did the bank call you? Everything go through okay?" I dropped my fork. It clattered loudly against the china. "The bank," I muttered, looking confused. "Did I go to the bank? I don't remember going to the bank. I lost my checkbook yesterday. Or maybe it was Tuesday. I spent 3 hours looking for it in the garage." I saw Jason's shoulders relax. He thought I was so far gone I didn't even remember writing the check. "Don't worry about it, Dad," he said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "I handled it for you. You gave it to me yesterday." "Did I?" I asked, staring blankly at the wall. Well, that is good. I trust you, Jerry. I mean Jason. After dinner, we moved to the living room. This was the moment. The trap was ready. On the coffee table, sitting on top of a stack of old magazines, was my bait. It was an iPad. Not a new one. It was an older model, thick and heavy with a cracked screen protector. I picked it up, my hands trembling intentionally. Jason, I said, you are good with these computer things. Can you look at this for me? It has been acting up. I can't get the solitaire game to work. It keeps freezing. Tiffany rolled her eyes and pulled out her phone, scrolling through social media, ignoring us completely. Jason sighed the sigh of a martyr and took the device from my hands. Sure, Dad, he said, tapping the screen with condescending patience. You probably just have too many apps open. You never close anything. He unlocked it. The passcode was 1234. I kept it simple on purpose. He swiped through the screens. See, Jason said, you have 50 tabs open in the browser, and you haven't updated the software in 2 years. He didn't know that the night before I had spent 4 hours with a tech specialist Leonard recommended. We had installed a very specific piece of software deep in the operating system. It was a parental control app designed to monitor children, but modified to run completely in the background. It recorded audio-tracked location and mirrored everything to a cloud server. But to keep it active, I needed it to connect to a new network. I needed it to connect to their network. Can you fix it? I asked, leaning in close. I just want to play my card game. Yeah, Jason said. I am just closing some background processes. It should run faster now. He handed it back to me. He didn't look at the settings. He didn't check for hidden apps. He was too arrogant. He thought he was the smartest person in the room. Thanks, son, I said. I set the iPad down on the table right next to Tiffany's open handbag. It was a massive tote bag big enough to carry a small dog. The evening wound down. I could tell they were desperate to leave. There was no alcohol here, and the air conditioning was set too warm for Tiffany's liking. Well, we should get going, Tiffany announced, standing up abruptly. We have an early morning. The florist is coming at 8. Right, I said, struggling to stand up from my chair. Let me walk you out. This was the only part of the plan that required physical dexterity. I had to be smooth. I walked them to the door. As Tiffany turned to put on her coat, she left her bag on the hallway table. Just for a second. Jason, I said, pointing to the kitchen. Did you leave your keys on the counter? I think I saw them there. Jason turned back toward the kitchen. Tiffany turned to look at him. In that split second of distraction, I reached into my pocket. I didn't grab the iPad from the table. I had switched them. The iPad on the table was a decoy. The one in my pocket was the one with the active software. I slid the device into the open mouth of Tiffany's bag. It slid between a makeup pouch and a wallet. It was silent. No, Dad. I have them right here, Jason called out, patting his pocket. My mistake, I said. My mind is playing tricks on me again. Tiffany swung the bag onto her shoulder. She didn't notice the extra weight. It was a heavy bag to begin with, filled with the clutter of her vanity. Goodbye, Rick, she said. Try to get some rest. You look terrible. Goodbye, I said. Drive safe. I watched them get into the car. I watched the taillights fade down the street. I locked the door. I threw the deadbolt, and then I stood there in the hallway, the silence of the house wrapping around me again. But this time I wasn't acting. I stood up straight. The limp vanished. The confused look in my eyes disappeared, replaced by the cold, hard stare of a predator who has just set a snare. I walked into my study. I didn't turn on the overhead light. I just turned on my desktop computer. The screen glowed blue in the darkness. I logged into the secure server Leonard had set up. I typed in the username and the complex password. The dashboard loaded. A map appeared on the screen. A small green dot was moving down the highway. Target online, the screen read. Audio stream active. I put on my noise-canceling headphones. They were big and comfortable, blocking out the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock. I adjusted the volume. At first, there was just the sound of road noise, the hum of tires on asphalt. Then I heard the click of a turn signal. And then I heard her voice, crystal clear, as if she was sitting right next to me. God, that house smells like old people and cabbage, Tiffany said. I thought I was going to vomit. Did you see him shaking? He could barely hold a fork. I leaned back in my chair, my eyes fixed on the green dot moving across the map. Yeah, Jason replied. He is getting worse fast. It is actually kind of sad. Sad, Tiffany laughed. It is perfect, Jason. It is absolutely perfect. It makes everything we are about to do so much easier. I reached for the record button on the screen and clicked it. The red light started blinking. I sat there in the dark, a 70-year-old man, listening to his son and his future daughter-in-law drive toward their doom. They thought they were driving home to their luxury apartment. They didn't know they were driving straight into a courtroom evidence file. I closed my eyes and listened. I was ready to hear the truth. I was ready to let it hurt me, because once the hurt was over, the only thing left would be justice. And justice, I decided, was going to be served cold. The recording continued to play, a steady stream of digital evidence pouring into my headphones. The timestamp on the screen indicated that it was now 1 a.m. They must have been back at their apartment. The background noise of the car engine had been replaced by the echo of their high ceilings. I could hear the clinking of glass, the sound of a bottle being uncorked. They were celebrating. They were toasting to the success of their deception, unaware that the guest of honor was sitting in the dark 5 miles away, listening to every word. Tiffany spoke first. Her voice was slurred, relaxed, stripped of the fake sweetness she used whenever she was in my presence. God, did you see his hands shaking tonight? She laughed. It was pathetic. He could barely hold the iPad. I thought he was going to drop it right on my foot. I stared at the audio waveform on my screen, watching the spikes of her laughter. It was a jagged, ugly sound. Yeah, Jason replied. His voice sounded heavy, tired. He is really going downhill fast, Tiff. I did not realize it was this bad. He forgot who I was for a second. He called me Jerry. That is Uncle Jerry's name. Uncle Jerry has been dead for 10 years. I took a slow sip of the whiskey I had poured myself. It burned, going down, a grounding sensation in a world that was rapidly spinning out of control. I had played the part of the senile old man too well. I had given them exactly what they wanted to see, and now they were using it as the foundation for my tomb. It is better this way, Tiffany said. Her voice dropped, becoming serious, calculated. It makes the timeline work. We cannot wait anymore, Jason. The interest payments on the house loan are 3 months behind. The credit cards are maxed out. If we do not get a cash infusion within 30 days, the whole house of cards collapses. We lose the apartment. We lose the cars. I lose my reputation. There was a pause. I could hear ice rattling in a glass. So what is the plan? Jason asked softly. The plan is simple, Tiffany said. Next week, right after the wedding, we take him to see Dr. Peterson. Peterson, Jason asked. The guy you went to college with, the psychiatrist. The very same, she purred. I already had lunch with him. I explained the situation. I told him how difficult Rick has become, how dangerous he is to himself. I told him about the memory loss, the confusion, the aggression. Peterson is sympathetic. For a small consulting fee, which we will pay him from the old man's account once we have access, he is willing to sign the competency evaluation. I gripped the armrests of my chair. My knuckles turned white. They were not just planning to steal from me. They were planning to erase me. A competency evaluation. a diagnosis of dementia or Alzheimer's. It was the legal equivalent of a death sentence for a man like me. It meant stripping me of my rights, my ability to sign checks, my ability to make decisions, my freedom. He is going to certify that Rick has early onset Alzheimer's. Tiffany continued. With that medical certificate, we go to the judge. We file for emergency guardianship. Since you are the only son, and since the mother is out of the picture, the court will grant it to you automatically. You become the conservator of the estate. I closed my eyes. I felt a physical pain in my chest, a sharp stabbing ache that had nothing to do with my heart condition and everything to do with heartbreak. My son was listening to this. My son was hearing his wife plot to legally kidnap his father. But Tiff Jason said, and for a second, just a second, I heard a glimmer of hesitation in his voice. He is still physically healthy. I mean, he drives. He cooks. Is it really that bad? Maybe we can just ask him for a loan again. I held my breath. Come on, Jason. Be a man. Stand up for me. Asking him is too slow, Tiffany snapped. And he is getting stingy. Did you see the look on his face when you asked for the photo money? He hesitated. We cannot rely on his charity anymore. We need total control. But putting him in a home, Jason mumbled. It seems extreme. Extreme, Tiffany shouted. Her voice peaked on the audiometer, turning red. You want to talk about extreme? Extreme is me being humiliated when my credit card is declined at the hair salon. Extreme is us losing everything because you cannot provide for the lifestyle you promised me. She took a breath, lowering her voice to a venomous whisper. Look at the math, Jason. The old man is sitting on a gold mine, the retirement fund, the land in Florida, the house he lives in. It is millions of dollars. Millions. Just sitting there, rotting away with him. If we get guardianship, we can liquidate the Florida lot immediately. That pays off our debts. Then we sell his house and move him into Greenwood. Greenwood. I knew that place. It was a state-funded facility on the edge of town. It smelled of urine and bleach. It was where people went when they had no one left to love them. It was a warehouse for the dying. Greenwood is a dump, Tiff, Jason said. It is affordable, she countered. And it is secure. Once he is in there, he stays there. And we get to live our lives. We get the inheritance now, while we are young enough to enjoy it. There was a long silence on the tape. I prayed for Jason to say no. I prayed for him to say that he couldn't do it to his own father. I prayed for him to remember the baseball games, the fishing trips, the nights I stayed up helping him with his homework. Jason, Tiffany said, her voice hard as steel. Do you want to go to jail for fraud on that bank loan? Or do you want to be rich? It is him or us. Choose. I listened. I listened to the silence that stretched out between them. Okay, Jason said finally. His voice was barely a whisper. Okay. We do it. Next week. The recording ended. I sat in the darkness of my study. The silence of the house rushed back in deafening and absolute. I took off the headphones and placed them gently on the desk. I looked at my hand. It was holding the glass of whiskey. It was shaking violently. The amber liquid was sloshing against the sides, threatening to spill. I wasn't afraid. Fear is what you feel when you don't know what is coming. I knew exactly what was coming. I wasn't sad. Sadness is for when you lose something you can get back. I had lost my son. He hadn't died. He had done something worse. He had chosen to become my executioner. What I felt was a cold, white-hot rage. It started in my stomach and spread to my fingertips. It was the kind of anger that clears your mind, that sharpens your vision. They wanted to declare me incompetent. They wanted to say I couldn't manage my own affairs. I finished the whiskey in one swallow. I slammed the glass down on the desk. I would show them exactly how competent I was. I reached for my phone. It was 2 in the morning. I didn't care. I dialed Leonard's personal cell number. He picked up on the second ring. "Rick," he said, his voice groggy. "Is everything okay?" "No." "Leo," I said. My voice was steady. My hand stopped shaking. "Everything is not okay. But it is about to be handled." "What happened?" he asked, fully awake now. "I have it," I said. "I have the audio. They are planning to file for guardianship next week. They have a doctor on the payroll. They are going to put me in Greenwood and sell everything." There was a silence on the other end of the line. Then I heard the rustle of bedsheets. "I am coming over," Leonard said. "No," I said. "Go to the office. Start drafting the trust documents. I want the house, the land, the stocks, everything moved. I want it irrevocable. I want it done by sunrise," Rick Leonard warned. "If we move assets that fast, it might look suspicious to a judge if they file." "Let them file," I said. "I want them to file. I want them to walk into that courtroom thinking they are the hunters." I looked at the picture of Jason that sat on my desk. It was from his graduation. He looked so proud. I picked up the frame. "I am not the victim here, Leo," I said. "I am the trap." I dropped the picture frame into the trash can. The glass shattered. "Get the papers ready," I said, "and call the wedding venue. I have a little change to make to the catering contract." I hung up the phone. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the streetlights were flickering. A storm was coming. Let it come. I was the one who built the shelter, and I was the one who could lock the door. My son wanted a war. He was about to find out that he was bringing a knife to a nuclear testing site. The father he knew was gone. The man who remained was done negotiating. The next morning, I did not shave. I did not comb my hair. I put on a stained undershirt and a pair of trousers that were too loose around the waist. I wanted to look like a man who had given up. If I was going to sell this lie, I had to commit to the role of the decaying patriarch completely. It was a role that tasted like ash in my mouth, but I swallowed it. I sat in the kitchen surrounded by dirty dishes I had deliberately left out. I dialed Jason's number. My hand was steady, but I forced my voice to tremble when he answered. "Jason." I whined into the receiver. "I can't find the thing. The metal thing. For the money." "What are you talking about, Dad?" Jason answered. He sounded annoyed, probably in the middle of a meeting, but the word money caught his attention instantly. "The key," I said, making my breath hitch. "The key to the big safe in the basement. I want you to have it." "I am scared, son. I am scared I am going to lose it, like I lost your mother's necklace. Please come get it. I will be there in 20 minutes, he said. The annoyance was gone, replaced by a sharp, hungry urgency. I hung up the phone and waited. I looked at the object sitting on the kitchen table. It was a heavy iron key. It did belong to the floor safe in the basement, a safe that hadn't been opened in 10 years. Back then it held important documents. Now it held nothing but stacks of yellowed newspapers from 1998 and a single envelope. Inside that envelope was not a will and it was not a deed. It was a letter I had written at 4 a.m, detailing exactly what I thought of my son's betrayal. But he wouldn't know that until he turned this key, and I was betting everything that his arrogance would keep him from opening it until he thought the victory was absolute. When Jason arrived, he didn't even knock. He burst through the back door, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on the key. He tried to compose himself, tried to put on the mask of the concerned son, but I could see the greed vibrating off him, like heat waves off a summer highway. "Dad," he said, walking over and putting a hand on my shoulder. It felt heavy and false. "You sound terrible. Are you okay? I am confused, Jason," I said, staring at my hands. "I don't remember what day it is. I don't remember if I paid the bills. I want you to take over." I pushed the key across the table toward him. Everything is in the basement safe, I whispered. The bearer bonds, the deeds to the Florida land, the cash reserves. It is all there. I want you to keep it safe until I get better. Jason's fingers closed around the cold metal of the key. He squeezed it tight. Of course, Dad, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice even though he was trying to look somber. I will keep it safe. We will get you the help you need. Tiffany knows a great doctor. We are going to take care of everything. He didn't offer to make me tea. He didn't offer to help clean the kitchen. He had the prize. He had the keys to the kingdom. He stayed for exactly 3 minutes, making empty promises about visiting more often, and then he was gone. I watched him leave from behind the curtain. He practically ran to his car. He was on the phone before the engine even started. I walked back to my study and put on the headphones. The tracking software was still running. The audio stream connected instantly. I needed to know if the bait had been taken. I needed to know if the fish was truly on the hook. Did you get it? Tiffany's voice screamed through the speakers. I got it, Jason shouted back. He was euphoric. I have the key. He gave it to me voluntarily, Tiff. He is totally gone. He thinks it is 1998. He said the bonds are in there. Bonds, Tiffany shrieked. Bearer bonds. Do you know how much those are worth? Millions, Jason said. It has to be millions. We are rich, Tiff. We are actually rich. The car engine revved as Jason sped down the highway. So we don't need to wait, Tiffany asked. No, Jason laughed. We don't need to wait for anything. The money is as good as ours. Once we get the guardianship next week, we can legally open that safe and deposit everything. But until then, we know it is there. It is our collateral. Then turn the car around, Tiffany ordered. What, Shai? We are going to the wedding planner, she said. If we are inheriting millions next week, I am not walking down the aisle with standard roses. I want the platinum package. I listened in disbelief as the conversation shifted from grand larceny to party planning. It was grotesque. They were so confident, so drunk on the idea of unearned wealth, that they didn't even bother to go to the basement and check the safe. They just assumed it was full because they believed they deserved it. They believed the world owed them a fortune. For the next 4 hours, I sat in my chair and listened to them spend money they didn't have. They drove straight to the office of the wedding coordinator. I heard the poor woman's voice as they barged in. We want to make some changes, Tiffany announced. We are very close to the date, the planner said hesitantly. Changes now will incur significant rush fees. Money is not an issue, Jason declared. His voice was full of the bravado of a man who thinks he just won the lottery. Bill us. We are good for it. I listened as they went down the list. They upgraded the menu to surf and turf for 300 guests. That was an extra $15,000. They ordered a custom ice sculpture of their initials. $2,000. They upgraded the champagne to Dom Perignon. $12,000. But the kicker, the thing that made me laugh out loud in my empty house, was the flowers. I want the orchid wall, Tiffany said. The one you said was too expensive. And I want imported peonies flown in from Holland. That will be an additional $40,000, the planner warned. And I need a deposit today. Put it on the card, Tiffany said. Which card? Jason whispered nervously. We are maxed out. Use the emergency card, she hissed back. The one we were saving for the mortgage. Who cares? We can pay off the whole house next week when we crack that safe open. I heard the sound of a credit card being swiped. Approved. They had just spent the last of their lifeline. They had taken the money meant to keep a roof over their heads and turned it into flowers that would die in 24 hours. I took off the headphones. I couldn't listen anymore. It was manic. It was self-destructive. It was perfect. They had swallowed the hook, the line, and the sinker. They believed the lie because it was the lie they wanted to hear. They thought I was a senile old fool who had just handed them the keys to the vault. They didn't realize I had actually handed them a shovel, and they were digging the hole so deep that no amount of begging would ever get them out. I stood up and walked to the kitchen. I started washing the dishes I had left out. I scrubbed the plates until they squeaked. I shaved my face and I put on a clean shirt. The act was over. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait for the wedding. I looked at the calendar on the wall. 3 days. 3 days until the happiest day of their lives turned into a public execution. I felt a strange sense of calm. I had done everything I could to save my son over the years. I had given him education, property, love. But you cannot save someone who falls in love with their own destruction. I went to the basement. I looked at the old floor safe. I patted the cold metal door. "Rest well," I whispered to the empty metal box. "You have a big job to do on Saturday." I went back upstairs and poured myself a glass of water. I needed to stay hydrated. I needed to be sharp. Because when I walked into that ballroom, I wasn't going to be the frail old man they expected. I was going to be the demolition expert. And the countdown had already begun. The next morning, I walked into Leonard's office with a lightness in my step that I had not felt in years. The heavy burden of being a father to an ungrateful son was gone, replaced by the clarity of a man with a mission. Leonard was waiting for me, his desk covered in stacks of legal documents that smelled of fresh ink and finality. He looked tired, likely having stayed up all night drafting the complex clauses I had requested, but he also looked determined. He knew as well as I did that this was not just a legal transaction. It was a rescue operation. "Everything is ready, Rick," Leonard said, sliding the first stack toward me. "This is the deed transfer for the house. This is the transfer for the investment portfolio. And this is the setup for the trust. Once you sign these, Richard Sterling effectively owns nothing. You will be a pauper on paper. Your net worth will be zero. The trust owns it all." I picked up the pen. It was a heavy, expensive fountain pen that glided across the paper. I signed my name. Richard Sterling. I signed it again. And again. With every signature, I felt a chain breaking, and the beneficiary I asked, just to hear him say it. "The Veterans Housing Initiative," Leonard confirmed. "Upon the execution of this trust, which happens the moment the ink dries, all assets are irrevocably designated for the construction of affordable housing for disabled veterans. The trust pays you a modest living allowance for the rest of your life, enough to travel and eat well. But the capital is locked. It cannot be touched by you. It cannot be touched by creditors. And it certainly cannot be touched by a court-appointed guardian." I finished the last signature. Leonard picked up a heavy notary stamp and brought it down on the paper with a loud thud. It sounded like a gavel closing a trial. "It is done," Leonard said. "If they take you to Dr. Peterson next week, if they get that guardianship, they will find themselves guardians of an empty shell. There is nothing to steal." I stood up and shook his hand. "Thank you, Leo," I said. "Now I have one more asset to liquidate." I drove home and went into the garage. Under a canvas tarp sat my pride and joy, a 1967 Shelby GT 500. I had spent 10 years restoring it, searching for original parts in junkyards across 3 states. It was midnight blue with white racing stripes, and the engine roared like a lion. Jason used to ask me when he could drive it. I always told him, "When you appreciate the work that went into it." He never did. I had called a collector I knew that morning. He arrived 10 minutes after I got home, a trailer waiting in the driveway. He walked around the car, running his hand over the flawless paint. "You are really selling it, Rick?" he asked, looking at me with disbelief. "I thought you were going to be buried in this car." "I am traveling light from now on," I said. He handed me a cashier's check. $185,000. It was a fair price. I folded the check and put it in my wallet. This was my freedom money. This was the cash that would fuel my new life in the RV, fishing in the Keys and driving through the mountains. I watched him winch the car onto the trailer. It hurt, I will admit that. But it hurt less than watching my son destroy my life. The car was just metal. My dignity was worth more. With the check in my pocket and my assets safe, I had one final stop to make. The grand ballroom at the Palmer House Hilton. It was where the wedding was scheduled to take place in 48 hours. The wedding planner, a woman named Ms. Halloway, who looked like she hadn't slept in a week, was running around the office with a clipboard. When she saw me, she stopped and forced a smile. "Mr. Sterling," she said, sounding relieved, "I am so glad you are here. The couple just called in a massive order for exotic flowers and the ice sculpture. The total cost has jumped significantly. I was getting worried about the final payment." I smiled, the benevolent father. "That is actually why I am here, Ms. Halloway," I said, sitting down in the plush chair opposite her desk. "I want to make sure everything is in order. I know the kids have gone a bit overboard with the platinum upgrades." She nodded vigorously. "It is going to be spectacular," she said. "But the final balance is due 24 hours before the event. That is tomorrow." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the original contract. "I have been looking over the paperwork," I said, "and I realized that with all these new additions, the liability structure is a bit outdated. Since Jason and Tiffany are making these specific requests for the flowers and the menu upgrades, my accountant advised me to update the billing addendum." I slid a piece of paper across the desk. I had typed it up myself using the same font as her contract. "What is this?" she asked, squinting at the text. "It is just a formality," I lied smoothly. "It simply states that while I have paid the initial deposits, any overages and the final balance for the upgrades are authorized by the couple. It allows you to see them directly if for some reason my check is delayed by the bank processing. It protects you, really." She read it quickly. It looked standard. It looked like legal jargon designed to ensure she got paid. "And I need to sign this?" she asked. "We both do," I said. "And since Jason and Tiffany are coming by later to pick up the table samples, just have them sign at the bottom, where it says acceptance of upgraded services. Tell them it is just the confirmation for the peonies and the lobster. They won't read the fine print. They never do." She laughed. "You are right about that. They are very excited about the flowers." I signed my name on the line that said, "Guarantor released." Then I pointed to the line below it. "Make sure they sign right there," I said. "Under primary financial responsibility." "I will take care of it, Mr. Sterling," she said, filing the paper away. "You are a very generous father to do all this." I stood up and buttoned my coat. "I try to give them exactly what they deserve," I said. I walked out of the hotel and into the cool Chicago afternoon. The trap was now fully armed. The assets were gone. The car was sold. And the contract for the wedding had been modified to turn the entire debt over to the bride and groom the moment the final bill came due. I checked my watch. Jason and Tiffany would be at the venue in 2 hours to look at napkins. They would sign that paper without a second glance because they were too busy imagining their photos in Vogue. They would sign away their financial future for a flower wall. I walked to the bank to deposit the check from the car sale into a new private account that Leonard had set up, one that was not linked to my social security number in the usual way. As I stood in the teller line, I felt a vibration in my pocket. It was a text from Jason. "Thanks for the key, Dad. You are the best. Love you." I looked at the screen. Love you. 2 words that used to mean the world to me. Now they were just letters on a screen. I deleted the message. I stepped up to the counter. "Deposit, please," I said to the teller. "And then I would like to withdraw $500 in singles." "Singles, sir?" the teller asked, surprised. "Yes," I said. "I have a wedding to attend on Saturday." And I want to make sure I have plenty of tips for the staff. They are going to need it. I walked out of the bank with a thick envelope of cash. I was ready. The stage was set. The actors knew their lines even if they didn't know the play was a tragedy. All that was left was to raise the curtain. The grand ballroom of the Palmer House Hilton smelled like a botanical garden that had been crossbred with a bank vault. The air was thick with the scent of imported peonies and expensive perfume. I stood at the entrance, leaning heavily on my cane, taking it all in. It was magnificent. It was grotesque. It was a perfect monument to the vanity of my son and the woman who had consumed him. I walked slowly onto the plush carpet. To my left stood the orchid wall Tiffany had demanded. It was 12 feet high and stretched 20 feet across a cascading waterfall of white and pink blooms that had been cut from the soil in Holland less than 48 hours ago. I did the math in my head. $40,000. That wall cost more than the college tuition I had paid for Jason's first 2 years of university, and tomorrow it would all be thrown into a dumpster behind the hotel. To my right was the ice sculpture. It was massive, glittering under the chandeliers. It was carved in the shape of 2 swans, with their necks intertwined to form a heart, and underneath, in frozen letters, were the initials J and T. As I watched, a single drop of water melted from the swan's beak and fell onto the floor. It was a fitting metaphor. They were melting their future away drop by expensive drop, and they didn't even notice the puddle forming at their feet. I made my way toward the bridal suite. The door was open, and the sound of screaming was spilling out into the hallway. "You are incompetent," Tiffany's voice shrieked. "I told you I wanted the contouring to be sharp. I look like a raccoon. Fix it or get out." I peeked inside. Tiffany was sitting in a chair that looked like a throne. She was wearing the dress. I had to admit, it was beautiful. It was a custom-designed gown with hand-stitched lace and a train that filled half the room. It cost $20,000. For that price, you could feed a family of 4 for 2 years. But on her, it looked like a costume. Her face was twisted in a snarl as she berated a young makeup artist who was trembling so hard she dropped a brush. Jason was standing in the corner holding a bottle of champagne. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, but his eyes were glassy. He wasn't nervous about the wedding. He wasn't nervous about the debt. He was high on the adrenaline of the lie I had fed him. He looked at Tiffany, not with love, but with the pride of a man who thinks he has bought a trophy he can finally afford to maintain. He saw me standing in the doorway. He blinked, and for a second I saw a flash of annoyance. "Dad," he said, coming over to block my view of Tiffany. "You are here early." I looked down at my own clothes. I had chosen my wardrobe with surgical precision. I was not wearing a tuxedo. I was wearing a gray wool suit I had bought at a department store in 1998. It was slightly too big in the shoulders now that I had lost weight. There was a small, noticeable mustard stain on the lapel that I had refused to clean. And I was wearing my old scuffed work boots. I wanted to be the contrast. I wanted to be the flaw in their perfect picture. "I just wanted to see you, son," I said, making my voice sound thin and reedy. I wanted to see the bride. Tiffany spun around in her chair. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my boots. "Oh my God," she said, her voice flat. "Jason, tell me he is not wearing that to the ceremony." "He has to be comfortable, babe," Jason said, ushering me out of the room. "Dad, why don't you go find your seat? We have some photos to take. And maybe try to stay near the back during the live stream. We don't want to confuse the viewers." I nodded obediently. "You look rich, son," I said. "You look like a king." Jason puffed out his chest. "We are going to be fine, Dad," he whispered, leaning in close. "Don't worry about a thing. The future is bright." He patted my pocket, checking for the imaginary checkbook he thought I still controlled. "Go find a seat," he said. I walked back out into the ballroom. The guests were starting to arrive. This was not a gathering of family and friends. It was a casting call. I recognized maybe 5 people from our side of the family. The rest were strangers. There were women in dresses that were too tight, holding phones up to their faces, live streaming their entrance. There were men in sunglasses indoors looking bored. I shuffled through the crowd, acting confused, bumping into a table here and there. I wanted them to see me. I wanted them to judge me. I heard the whispers as I passed. They didn't even try to lower their voices. "Is that him, a woman with heavily injected lips?" asked her companion. "Yeah, that is the dad," the man replied. "Tiffany said he has lost his mind. Sad, really. But look at him. He looks like a homeless guy who wandered in off the street." I heard another group near the bar. "I heard he is loaded, though," a man in a velvet jacket said. "Like construction tycoon loaded. That is why Tiffany is sticking around. She said he is going into a home next week." Going into a home. They were talking about my imprisonment like it was the weather forecast. I found my table. Table number 29. It was in the far back corner near the kitchen doors. It was the table for the rejects. The distant cousins, the old neighbors, and apparently the father of the groom. I sat down. The chair was uncomfortable. I poured myself a glass of water. I watched them filter in. They were beautiful, shiny, and hollow. They were here to eat my food, drink my wine, and laugh at my decline. A waiter walked by with a tray of hors d'oeuvres. It was caviar on blinis. "Would you like one, sir?" he asked, looking at my suit with pity. "No, thank you," I said. "I am saving my appetite." I looked toward the front of the room. The lights were dimming. The music was swelling. A string quartet began to play a modern pop song. The ceremony was about to begin. Jason was standing at the altar. He looked confident. He looked like a man who thought he had gotten away with murder. Tiffany was at the back of the aisle, adjusting her veil. She looked victorious. I sat back in my chair and crossed my arms over my chest. I felt the envelope in my inside pocket. It contained the deed to the trust, the receipt for the car sale, and the modified contract with the wedding planner. Let them have their moment. Let them walk down the aisle. Let them say their vows. I wasn't the feeble old man they thought I was. I was the demolition man, and I had already planted the dynamite at the base of their pillars. All I was waiting for was the right moment to push the plunger. I looked at Jason one last time. I remembered teaching him how to fish. I remembered telling him that patience is the most important skill a man can have. You have to wait for the bobber to sink before you set the hook. "Well, son," I thought, as the music reached a crescendo. The bobber just went under. I smiled. A guest at the next table saw it and shivered. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a wolf who realizes the sheep have forgotten to lock the gate. The doors opened. The bride began to walk. The show was starting, and I was ready to steal the scene. The moment arrived with the sharp clinking of a silver spoon against a crystal champagne flute. The sound cut through the murmur of 300 guests, silencing the chatter about stock options and summer homes. The master of ceremonies, a man with a smile so bright it looked painful, stepped to the center of the dance floor. He adjusted his bow tie and spoke into the microphone with that smooth radio announcer voice that always sounds fake to a man who has spent his life listening to the honest roar of heavy machinery. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC boomed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "We have arrived at a very special moment in our evening. Before we cut the cake and before we open the dance floor, we have a few words from the man who made this fairy tale possible. Please put your hands together for the father of the groom and the generous main sponsor of tonight's magnificent celebration, Mr. Richard Sterling." The applause was polite, but thin. It was the kind of applause you give to a charity case, not a hero. I pushed my chair back. It scraped loudly against the floor, a harsh sound in the elegant room. I stood up slowly. My knee was stiff, but I didn't let that stop me. I buttoned my old gray jacket, the one with the stain, and began the long walk to the stage. The ballroom felt massive. To get to the microphone, I had to walk past tables filled with people who were whispering about me. I could feel their eyes crawling over my scuffed boots and my frayed collar. I saw a young woman in a sequined dress nudge her boyfriend and point at my shoes, suppressing a giggle. They saw a confused old man stumbling toward the spotlight. They had no idea they were watching a demolition expert walking toward the detonator. As I approached the head table, I looked at my family. My son Jason was sitting up straight, adjusting his cufflinks. When our eyes locked, he didn't smile with warmth. He smiled with anticipation. It was the look a dog gives you when you are holding a piece of meat. He nodded at me, a small encouraging nod that said, "Get it over with, old man, and give us the check." Next to him, Tiffany was practically vibrating. She leaned over to Jason, covering her mouth with her hand, but I was close enough now to see the movement of her lips. She whispered something, and then she winked. It was a conspiratorial, greedy wink. She was signaling him to get ready. In her mind, the next 5 minutes were just a formality before the transfer of wealth. She probably already had the banking app open on her phone under the table. I climbed the 3 small stairs to the stage. The spotlight hit me blindingly bright and hot. For a second, I just stood there blinking. The silence in the room grew heavy. I let it stretch, let it become uncomfortable. I wanted them to look at me. I wanted them to really see me not just as a wallet, but as the man they had underestimated. I reached out and gripped the microphone stand. My hand, large and calloused, looked rough against the polished chrome. I leaned in close to the mic. I could hear my own breathing amplified through the massive speakers. "Thank you," I said. My voice was raspy, deeper than the MC's worn down by years of shouting over jackhammers. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw the orchid wall costing $40,000. I saw the ice sculpture dripping away. I saw the waste. I am not a man of many words. I began keeping my tone soft, almost gentle. I am a man of labor. For 40 years I woke up before the sun. I put on boots just like the ones I am wearing tonight. I went out into the cold, into the heat, into the rain. I poured concrete until my back felt like it was breaking. I welded steel until my eyes burned. I paused. I looked directly at Jason. He was feigning interest, putting on his good son face for the cameras that were live streaming the event. I did it for a reason, I continued. I did it because I wanted to build something that would last. Not just buildings. I wanted to build a foundation for my family. I wanted to make sure that my son would never have to touch wet cement in 0-degree weather unless he wanted to. I wanted to give him a head start. A few people in the audience murmured, "Aw." They thought this was the sentimental part. They thought I was about to cry and tell everyone how proud I was. I looked down at my hands, turning them over so the palms faced the audience. The scars were visible even under the stage lights. I built his life with these hands. I said, my voice gaining a little strength. I paid for the private schools. I paid for the college degree. I bought the first car. And 3 years ago, I bought the house that Jason and Tiffany live in. I gave them everything I had because I believed that a father's job is to lift his children higher than himself. Tiffany smiled smugly, taking a sip of her champagne. She loved this part. She loved hearing about what she owned. But I said, and the word hung in the air like a gunshot. The smile on Tiffany's face faltered just a fraction. Jason shifted in his seat. "But there is a danger in construction," I said. My voice dropping, becoming hard and cold like drying concrete. Sometimes when you are so busy building, you forget to check the quality of the materials you are using. You can build a palace, but if the wood is rotten, if the steel is weak, it will collapse on top of you. I gripped the microphone tighter. The gentle old man was gone. I thought I was raising a son, I said, my voice booming now, filling every corner of the room. I thought I was supporting a young couple starting their life, but it seems the cement dust from all those years of work must have gotten into my eyes. Because I was blind. I didn't see what was really standing in front of me. I pointed a shaking finger at the head table. Jason froze. Tiffany put her glass down. I didn't see that I wasn't raising a man, I said. I was raising a parasite. I didn't see that I wasn't welcoming a daughter. I was welcoming a predator. A gasp rippled through the room. The air was suddenly sucked out of the ballroom. The MC looked around nervously, wondering if he should cut the mic. But I was just getting started. I looked straight into the camera lens that was broadcasting to Tiffany's precious social media followers. You all see the flowers, I said. You see the ice sculpture. You see the dress. You think this is success. You think this is love. But let me show you what this really is. Let me show you the price of the champagne you are drinking. I turned my head toward the back of the room up to the balcony where the audiovisual technician was waiting. It was a young guy I had hired personally earlier that day, slipping him $500 to ignore the run sheet and follow my cue. Turn it off, I commanded. The technician hit the switch. The romantic mood lighting plunged into darkness. The soft background music cut out with a screech. The room was pitch black for a heartbeat, creating a wave of panic among the guests. Then the massive LED screen behind the stage, which had been displaying a slideshow of Jason and Tiffany's engagement photos, flickered to life. But the smiling faces were gone. The image that filled the 20-foot screen was shaky and grainy. It was footage from a security camera. But it was clear enough. It showed a house, a large colonial-style house in Oak Brook. The audience squinted. They recognized the house. It was the one Tiffany posted about all the time. But something was wrong. In the video, the front lawn was dead. The windows were dark. And there, planted right in the center of the driveway, illuminated by the harsh streetlights, was a sign. It wasn't a welcome home sign. It was a foreclosure notice. Large red letters that screamed failure. Notice of seizure, bank property. I heard the whispers start again, but this time they were louder. They were confused. Why is there a foreclosure sign? Someone asked. I thought they owned it. Wait, look at the timestamp, another person said. That is from yesterday. I leaned back into the microphone. This is the house I bought for them, I said, my voice cutting through the confusion. Paid in full. A gift of $500,000. And this is what it looks like today. Abandoned. Gutted. Seized by the bank because they took out loans against it to buy handbags and vacations, and then refused to pay the debt. Jason stood up. He looked pale, like all the blood had been drained from his body. Dad, stop, he shouted, but without a microphone, his voice was swallowed by the room. Dad, please. I ignored him. I looked at the technician again. Show them the inside, I said. The screen changed. Now it was footage from the handheld camera I had used when I snuck onto the property. It panned across the empty living room. No furniture. No family photos. Just trash on the floor and wires hanging from the ceiling where light fixtures had been ripped out and sold. Then the camera moved to the backyard. It showed the pool filled with black water and garbage. And it showed the setup. The lights. The reflectors. The fake set they used to film their content. They don't live there, I narrated, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. They haven't lived there in a year. They rent it out by the hour to strangers to pay for a penthouse downtown so they can pretend to be better than the people I worked my whole life to serve. Tiffany was on her feet now. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the guests at their phones. Everyone was recording. Her humiliation was being broadcast live to the world she tried so hard to impress. Turn it off, she screamed, her face contorted in ugly rage. Turn it off right now. I smiled. It was a cold, hard smile. Oh, I am not done, I said. You wanted a platinum wedding, Tiffany. You wanted a show. Well, sit down, because the main feature is just beginning. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small black remote control for the audio system. "You thought I was a senile old man," I said to the silent, stunned room. "You thought I was losing my mind. You thought you could trick me, use me, and then throw me away like an old work boot." I pressed the button on the remote. "But you forgot one thing," I said, as the speakers crackled to life. "I built the foundation you are standing on, and I know exactly where the weak spots are." The screen went black, and then the sound of Tiffany's voice, clear and distinct, filled the ballroom. It was the recording from the car ride, and as the first words of their conspiracy echoed off the walls, I saw the color drain from Tiffany's face until she looked like the ice sculpture melting beside her. The trap had snapped shut, and there was no way out. The voice on the speakers was unmistakable. It was high, sharp, and dripping with a venom that no amount of static could hide. It echoed through the ballroom, bouncing off the vaulted ceilings and the terrified faces of the guests. I stood there leaning on the podium, watching the words hit my son and his wife like physical blows. The recording continued to play. It was the part where Tiffany laughed. It was a cold, cruel sound. She said, "I have the doctor ready. We will sign the papers next week. Once the old man is locked away in Greenwood, we sell the Florida land immediately. He won't even know what hit him." Then came Jason's voice. "Weak, complicit." He said, "But what if he resists?" And Tiffany replied fiercely, "Who cares if he resists? He is a ghost, Jason. We just need him to sign the checks, and then he can die for all I care. The sooner he is gone, the sooner we can stop pretending to like his cheap cooking." The silence that followed in the ballroom was absolute. It was heavy, suffocating silence. 300 people were holding their breath. The servers had stopped moving. The photographer had lowered his camera. All eyes were fixed on the head table. Tiffany's face had gone from pale to a blotchy, furious red. She looked at the guests who were now looking at her with undisguised horror. She realized in that split second that the mask had not just slipped, it had been ripped off and set on fire. She looked at me. Her eyes were not the eyes of a daughter-in-law. They were the eyes of a cornered animal. "You illegal old bat," she screamed. She kicked her chair back so hard it toppled over. She grabbed a steak knife from the table, though I don't think she knew what she was doing. She just wanted to stop the noise. She wanted to stop the truth. She hiked up her $20,000 dress and charged toward the stage. "Turn it off," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "It is fake. It is AI. He is lying." She ran up the stairs, her hands clawing at the air, reaching for the microphone, reaching for me. She looked like a demon in white lace, but she never reached me. Two men in dark suits stepped out from behind the heavy velvet curtains at the back of the stage. I had hired them that morning from a private security firm. Former military. Big men who did not care about wedding etiquette. One of them stepped in front of me, forming a human wall. He caught Tiffany by the arm as she tried to lunge past him. He didn't hurt her, but he stopped her cold. She flailed against him, screaming obscenities that would make a sailor blush. "Let go of me," she yelled. "That is my wedding. That is my money." Jason was still sitting at the table. He hadn't moved. He was staring at the tablecloth, his hands trembling violently. He knew. He knew it was all over. I raised the microphone to my lips again. I waited for Tiffany to stop screaming. When she finally ran out of breath, sobbing with rage in the grip of the security guard, I spoke. "You are right, Tiffany," I said, my voice calm and steady. "It is your wedding, but it is not your money." I reached into my inside pocket and pulled out a folded document. I held it up for the room to see. "This morning," I said, "at 9 a.m., I signed a deed of trust. It transfers every single asset I own, my savings, my stocks, and the land you were planning to sell, into an irrevocable charitable trust for disabled veterans." I saw Jason's head snap up. His eyes went wide. "Everything," I repeated. "I am officially a poor man, Jason. There is no inheritance. There is no estate to manage. There is no gold mine for you to raid." Even if you declared me insane right now, you would only be the guardian of a man with a checking account that has $500 in it. Tiffany went limp in the guard's arms. She stared at me, her mouth open. And as for the house, I continued pointing to the frozen image of the foreclosure sign on the screen behind me. You don't have to worry about maintaining it anymore. The bank took possession at noon today. They changed the locks an hour ago. Your clothes, your furniture, whatever was left inside is now the property of the lender. You are homeless. A murmur went through the crowd. Some people were actually standing up to get a better view. But I am a fair man, I said, looking down at Jason. I believe in giving people exactly what they signed up for. I pulled out the second piece of paper. The contract from the wedding planner. You wanted a platinum wedding, I said. You wanted the orchid wall. You wanted the lobster. You wanted the best of everything because you thought Daddy was paying the bill. I walked to the edge of the stage and looked down at the wedding planner, Ms. Halloway, who was standing near the front, looking terrified. Ms. Halloway, I asked, do you have the addendum we signed yesterday? She nodded, her hands shaking as she pulled the clipboard close to her chest. Good, I said, because as of this moment I am exercising the cancellation clause on my sponsorship. I am withdrawing my credit card on file. I looked back at Jason. You signed the paper yesterday, son, I said. You didn't read it. You were too busy looking at yourself in the mirror. That addendum states that all overages and the final balance are the sole responsibility of the bride and groom. I paused for effect. This party costs $200,000, I said. I have paid the deposit of $10,000. That leaves a balance of $190,000. And since the services have already been rendered, the debt is immediate. I looked at Tiffany, who was now weeping, her mascara running down her face in black streaks. Congratulations, I said. You wanted to be a power couple. You just started your marriage with nearly $250,000 in debt, no home, and no job. I looked at the crowd. I suggest you all eat the cake, I told them. It is the most expensive piece of sugar you will ever taste. And I suggest you enjoy the open bar because the groom will be washing dishes in this hotel for the next 10 years to pay for it. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was done. The demolition was complete. The dust was settling. I looked at the microphone in my hand. It was a heavy metal object. I didn't need it anymore. I had said everything I needed to say. I opened my hand. The microphone fell. It hit the hardwood floor of the stage with a sound that cracked through the room like a gunshot. A dull, heavy thud that signaled the end. Boop. The feedback screeched for a second, then silence returned. I turned my back on them. I turned my back on the weeping bride and the broken son. I walked toward the side exit, my boots clicking rhythmically on the floor. The security guard stepped aside to let me pass. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I knew what was behind me. A ruin. A pile of rubble that they had built themselves. I pushed open the exit doors and walked out into the cool night air of Chicago. I took a deep breath. It smelled of rain and exhaust, but to me it smelled like freedom. I walked toward the bus stop. I didn't have my luxury car anymore. I didn't have my millions. But I had my dignity. And I had the rest of my life to live on my own terms. As I waited for the bus, I pulled the envelope of cash from my pocket. $500. It wasn't much. But it was enough for a ticket to Florida. Leonard was meeting me there with the RV. The fish were biting. The sun was warm. And I was finally, truly free. I did not stay to watch the handcuffs go on, but I heard the sirens. As I stood at the bus stop across the street from the Palmer House Hilton, the night air of Chicago was split by the wail of emergency vehicles. Blue and red lights bounced off the wet pavement, painting the city in the colors of a crime scene. I learned later from the newspapers what happened after I dropped that microphone. Apparently, The orchid vendor and the caterer were not the only ones Jason and Tiffany owed money to. When the live stream went viral, revealing their fraud to the world, a group of rather unsavory loan sharks who had been funding Tiffany's gambling habits decided to show up to collect their debt in person. The brawl that ensued destroyed the rest of the ice sculpture and sent 3 people to the hospital. My son and his wife were arrested not just for the disturbance, but for the bank fraud I had exposed. The wedding of the century ended with mugshots instead of portraits. I sat on the bus watching the city skyline fade into the distance. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't happiness. You can never be happy about the destruction of your own child, no matter how much they deserve it. It was relief. It was the feeling of setting down a heavy pack after hiking up a mountain for 30 years. I had carried Jason for too long. I had carried his excuses, his failures, and his greed. Now he was carrying his own weight and the weight of the chains he had forged. 12 months have passed since that night. The seasons changed, and so did my life. I traded the gray concrete of Chicago for the turquoise waters of the Florida Keys. I live simply now. My home is a 30-foot Winnebago parked in a quiet community of retirees who don't care about designer handbags or social media followers. We care about the tide charts and who makes the best lime pie. Today the sun is high and hot. I am sitting on a small fishing boat rocking gently on the waves. Across from me sits Leonard. He traded his 3-piece suits for a Hawaiian shirt and a bucket hat, though he still wears his expensive watch. We don't talk much. We don't need to. The line in my hand tugs occasionally, a reminder that there is life beneath the surface. Leonard reaches into his tackle box and pulls out an envelope. He doesn't look at me when he hands it over. "It came to the office yesterday," Leonard says quietly. "It was forwarded from the correctional facility in Illinois." I take the envelope. It is made of cheap, rough paper. The stamp in the corner is red ink. Inmate correspondence. I look at the handwriting. It is jagged and desperate. It is Jason's handwriting. I run my thumb over the paper. I don't need to open it to know what it says. I have received 3 of these in the last 6 months. They are all the same. He starts with an apology, a hollow sorry, that sounds more like a regret for getting caught than remorse for what he did. Then comes the blame. He blames Tiffany. He says she bewitched him. He says he was just trying to make her happy. He takes no responsibility for the fact that he was the one who looked me in the eye and lied. And then finally comes the ask. He needs money for the commissary. He needs money for a better lawyer. He needs me to speak to the parole board. I look at Leonard. He is watching me over the rim of his sunglasses. "Do you want to read it?" Leonard asks. "No," I say. I reach into my pocket and pull out a lighter. The flame flickers in the sea breeze, struggling to stay alive. I hold the corner of the envelope to the fire. The cheap paper catches quickly. The orange flame eats the words before I can read them. It consumes the apologies I don't believe, and the requests I will never grant. I hold the burning letter over the side of the boat. The ash turns black and gray, crumbling into the blue water. Small fish dart up to investigate the debris, then swim away when they realize it is nothing but waste. I watch the last piece of paper disappear into the current. "He is my son," I say to the ocean. "But he is a stranger." Leonard nods. He understands. "Some people might think I am a monster," I say, baiting my hook again. "They might think it is cruel to leave your own flesh and blood in a cell while you are out here fishing in the sun. But I am not cruel. I am just a teacher who finally decided to teach the lesson plan. I ignored for 30 years. I cast my line out. The sinker hits the water with a satisfying plop. I taught him that you can't build a life on a foundation of lies. I continue. I taught him that love is not an ATM machine. I taught him that every action, every choice has a price tag attached to it. He spent his whole life thinking he could dine and dash. He thought he could order the lobster and leave the bill for the old man. I lean back, feeling the sun on my face. But the bill always comes due, I say. And the price of betrayal is loneliness. He is paying his tab now, and I am debt-free. I look at the horizon where the sky meets the sea. It is wide and open and full of possibility. For the first time in my life, I am not living for someone else. I am not building a legacy for ungrateful heirs. I am just living. I chose freedom, I whisper, and it was the best deal I ever made. Leonard cracks open a cold soda and hands it to me. To freedom, he says. To freedom, I reply. We sit there as the sun begins to dip, two old men on a small boat surrounded by nothing but water and peace. I don't know what tomorrow will bring. I don't know if Jason will ever truly learn, but that is not my project anymore. I retired from the construction business. I am done fixing broken things that don't want to be repaired. I take a sip of the soda and smile. The fish are biting today, and that is all that matters. This story reminds us that enabling bad behavior is not an act of love, it is an act of destruction. When we shield people from the consequences of their actions, we rob them of the opportunity to grow and mature. Richard thought he was helping his son by giving him everything, but he was actually crippling him. True generosity requires boundaries, and true love requires respect. Never set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, especially if they are the ones holding the match. Dignity is the most valuable asset you own, and unlike money, once you lose it, you can't always earn it back. If this story gave you the courage to set boundaries in your own life, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about justice and resilience. Have you ever had to cut off a toxic family member to save yourself? Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one. See you in the next video.